Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another video here. How's everyone doing here? It's Aaron the History Buff back again with another video here, and today I'm back into yet again here to some more presentations here, and today I'm gonna be doing something a little bit different here. So in today's video, we're gonna be talking about basically the history of the economics. So basically, what I'm gonna be doing here is, as you can see here, I'm gonna be covering over basically just mostly about history's like greatest economic and economists here, and like basically analyzed through basically different like basically through many like these leaders through influence on different people countries like different economies, how they basically rise up or sometimes and like falls down here through like basically inflation or hyperinflation, or and we're going to be talking with that, we're going to be talking about how that is to go like impacted on imported many through imported goods here, stocks, and many as well as many goods here imported by many people, as well as through the imported goods. So that comes from like tariffs here from different many other countries here that and as well as also food, grains, and and many of the plants and different products that relies on their economies, and as well as also the no more growing of factories that make these economies they basically grow and basically get richer, and the increase of the markets here, and that's what we're going to be talking about, all that stuff in this video here. So but before we get into this video here, if you guys haven't yet, don't forget to like, hit the subscribe button, and turn on the bell notifications. That way you get notified by every video on the post in the channel. And also don't forget to comment also if you guys want me to do more history content, or if you want to see me also do a lot more like history of economics here, then please let me know down in the comments down below, or something that's related to economics. So anyways, let's get right into the video here. Alright, here we go. History of economics. Okay, so let's start off with one of the guys here. So we have Thomas Robert Malthus, or Thomas Malthus as we call him here. He was born back in England back in 1766 on February 13th here, and he was known for his theory of the population that trends to the outpost. So I'm gonna read through this here, and then I'll kind of then through explain it through like basically through my own words here. Then afterwards. So basically, all right. So Thomas Malthus is known for the theory of population that tends to outpost the food supply, leading to the inevitable disasters like the famine, disease, and war, outlined in his 1798 work, an essay on the principle of population. He argued that the caution of growth of exponentially, while food increases are arithmetically, suggesting that poverty and misery were unavoidable without strict limits on reproduction, influencing the ideas of economics, demography, and sustainability. So basically, in other words, here, like basically, he thinks that the growing population would basically overflow here, and he thinks that it would create a lot of chaos here and a lot of war and like basically a lot of destruction, and that would make it also really bad for like basically for the economy to basically to grow here. And yeah, no, and it's also because that it's also the diseases with that because it's also I mean yeah, and like it said here, Malthus thinks that the overpopulation would lead to war, destruction, chaos, food shortages, and famine. And for the opposite, then he thinks also that like with less people, also like with the if we decrease the population, there would be less war, less destruction, chaos, food shortages, and the famine. But I would also later kind of disagree here, because I mean, for me honestly, I think we need to maintain the same population, to like a little bit increase it to kind of keep it in a balance here, and in order to also to maintain also keep working into to give while it's giving more factory worker rights in many factories, but also attain a lot of education, open businesses, and as well as open like markets here, and to create a lot of like imported goods and resources and food, and that basically people needed to find here, and like to basically to survive together as like as a society here. And that's the argument also pointed here from to for Thomas Malthus. Yeah, well, let's get through it. And we also have Thomas Mal, and then we have next we have David Ricardo from born from 1772 and died on 1823. He claims that it was the foundational classical economist that was known for the theory of comparative advantage, which he argues that the benefits for all nations if they specialize on producing goods, and was also with the opportunity costs. He developed the labor theory of value, and that is the idea that the goods value is based on the labor required for the conjunction. In comparative advantage, it said also that the nation is less efficient at producing all goods here. Trade is mutually beneficial if countries specialize goods where they have relative rather than absolute advantage. And also, and going back to also the labor of the theory of value, the exchange of value is a commodity is determined by the amount of labor needed for its production. So like basically, in other words here, like, in many factories and businesses like were opened up here to make like these kind of imported goods here, as well as creating these lot of resources like steel, iron, and grain, but also like the amount of growing like basically construction of like many machines within these factories as well. And it's also like basically that also like specialized through like that nations would specialize like many goods here, that they created those goods here, and they would then like later import it to like basically to many of the also the other different countries here. And going down to his rent of theory here, it states that rent is paid as landowners use as the original and indestructible powers of soil. As population increases, less fertile land is cultivated, and increasing rent is more productive land here. So basically, in other words here, if like say for example, if the growing amount of factories right here, and also the growing amount of like from the factories like smoke or something, that means like the fire and coal that's basically the construction machines that comes from these factories. That means also that the more workers that comes from these factories, the less like grain and like plants that was later grown here. So like less agriculture. And also that and it's also that it's increasingly a lot of makes the cost of productive land will make it a lot more expensive here. And the distribution of income, right? Ricardo analyzed how economic growth distributes wealth along the three classes, which are basically the landowners here, the guys who are basically, which in case this is the guys who are basically working and like basically for the agricultural land, like like plants and crops here, and they basically pay the rent for their land. And there are basically the workers here, who are basically the guys who are like basically working into the factories here, and like they work and they usually like basically work for like this was during around like the Industrial Revolution, so they basically work for like a lot more hours with like unsafe conditions here, and whilst also that they have warnings of like many of the like a lot of cautions of these dangerous machines here, as well as also that there's a lot of disease that was being spread around those machines, as well as a lot of child slave labor. And so and it's also like it's very dangerous for them to work in the factories with these conditions here. And then finally you have the capitalists here. These are like basically kind of like the more like high wealthy rich men here, like that were basically create like basically a lot of money here, while like bosses and all here that basically control like basically the money and production and the profits from the production of the men who are working in from these factories here. And yeah, and then no here, and I did also remember, and this is kind of also a little similar to, because if you guys seen one of my videos in my last video, we talked about also during around also the Industrial Revolution and the Gilded Age here, where we talked about robber barons and Andrew Carnegie and John C. Rockefeller, who were the guys, who were making the production of oil and steel here, that they were philanthropists, and that the thing is to point out is that they do create themselves a lot of wealth, and meaning that they will have a lot of money too here, which kind of relates to this a bit. And his stationary stage with David Ricardo, that he predicted that the economic growth would eventually slow profits fall due to the rising of food prices here and the increasing wages, leading to the stationary state here. Um, so yeah, this is basically, this is like requires, like, a lot of hard work here, and a lot of and as well as also a lot of effort here for people, like especially those who are working in the factories, mainly because, yeah, from due to like in the creating slowly, but from many imported goods, like slowing down the food prices, rising food prices, and also like the increasing wages here, because also you need to remember also here is that there were also men, as well as later also women here from the women's right, that they were protesting about, to have better working hours, better working conditions, and less hours to work here. And yeah, no, and this is basically after then when the workers and others went on strike here during this time period here. Okay, let's keep going here. All right, so now we have Adam Smith here. He was the father of capitalism here. And if you guys haven't known already yet here, I did cover Adam Smith here before here in like my history of Edinburgh video, and I think my part 2 of history of the greatest philosophers video. And if you guys haven't seen those videos yet here, I'll put the links in the description down below, and if you want to check them out for yourself here. But we're gonna talk about Adam Smith once again here, and yeah, no, I'll read through this whole thing again here, and then then I can summarize it and talk with you guys all about it here. And I do have these videos here, and I'll also put them in link in the description because they're really interesting to watch here, in my opinion. Alright, so Adam Smith was the 18th century Scottish economist and philosopher, best known as the father of modern economists for his book, The Wealth of Nations. He is considered the key figure of the Scottish Enlightenment and is a user of his idea for free markets, self-interest, and the division of labor, often associated with the modern capitalism, where he has also wrote the ethics in later work, such as the Moral of Sentiments here. And alright, and so now let's go over let's go for this. The birth of the education here, both in Kirkcaldy, Scotland. He was born in Kirkcaldy, Scotland, which is basically it's near Edinburgh in 1723, where he then he was in basically he was the guy who was supported also his mother, but he then later studied at both Glasgow and Oxford universities here, and he was working on philosophy and economics here, and he also published the theory of moral sentiments here, and this is basically kind of like the book here where it's more asking about how to become more immature, more of just a gentleman here, as well as to whereas acting to those of kindly, and as well as based on economic those of the conditions, and it's also worth noting also in the moral sentiments that if you guys didn't know also that both Adam Smith and David Hume are considered the best friends here. And one thing I would also share that I have not shared about is that they also share one other common philosophy here, which was the idea of the observatory theory here, which is basically the ideal observatory, the guy who basically basically predicts something about you that you wanted something here, and do a big event or whatever, and then the ideal observatory then basically claims through this theory here and thinks as of the future, and like basically becomes like basically what you might actually kind of like look like into it here, and that's another thought I thought I wanted to share you also here that I've mentioned. But he published his Wealth of Nations in 1776 here, and remember this is also the day also that I mentioned that the same year that David Hume had passed away here in back in August here. But this work here that Adam Smith wrote is that this is a work of considered the foundation of modern economists, introduced the concepts like division of labor, self-interest, like deriving market economies, limits government with limited government intervention, and like say for like for example, like if you're in like in a supermarket, right, and you like basically buy stuff here, like I don't know, like say you buy ramen, Doritos, or Mountain Dew, or popcorn, for example, or sugar cookies, right? And then you go to the cashier here, and then the cashier scans all the food, and then he or she then basically calculates it here all together with you, and then you get like the total amount of like costs here plus with tax, and then you have to like basically pay through it back with like either your own money or like your own credit card, and yeah, and that's how the basically that kind of modern system of capitalism kind of works here, and it works individually by human, and then with also technology, technologically with your phone or device, or if you use credit cards to pay out back with all the money here, and through like the more people like that pays also these more imported goods here, the more like the pride that the economy then like grows up with these for like say for different companies and markets here that all connects to many economies from different countries. And then we also have, and then like later on here, that's also like basically capitalism here, and it's way different also from communism, which who I'm gonna get to way later here, and probably a different from socialism, but then later also his back to his moral of sentiments, published in the earlier, this work focuses on the ethics, and it argues that human behavior is also influenced by impartial sector and struggles between passion and reason. So yeah, basically, kind of like like I said before, kind of like basically you're being you and yourself, your own being here, and basically to like predict. So like I'm talking about before, like what actions or like moral judgments or moral things you do, like basically to predict whether this thing you did was like basically right or wrong here. And going through his career, he was a professor of logic and the moral philosophy at the University of Glasgow, but then he later became a commissioner in customs in Edinburgh, where he then died in 1790. And with the not to mention also for Adam Smith here that he was in his invisible hand is a mentor for the unseen market, focuses on the guide his self-interest and to promote the public good, and that in the free market individuals pursue their own economic goals, like a baker trying to make profit and unintentionally benefits from creating products that consumers that want and need, and through the mechanisms of supply, demand, and competition without the need for central planning of government or government intervention. So yeah, basically, like in other words here that I could just say this here is that that Adam Smith is basically saying here that it allows people like what I mean like with the invisible hand, I'm not talking about like a hand that is actually invisible here. It basically just means that that it's like that it allows people to go freely to like to open and markets to basically to have free go and get like free money with also with self-interest here, and they would but despite with alongside with economic goals like being a baker or like being a cashier in a bookstore or like food markets or basically work at a fast food restaurant or something like that, as I'm giving examples here, or like and like what depending on the products here of what the consumer needs there, and as well as also like basically the supply and the demand there. In other words, like picking wisely of like basically what size by like why supply and demand that you basically want to need of what you desire, or like by knowing about the price and the difference and the as well as also the as well as also the value of like how important the any product is there. And yeah, and when before you like purchase it also, and you can all do this freely without government intervention, is this point that Adam Smith is trying to make here. All right, so now let's go to the next one. All right, but and the opposite of capitalism. Speaking of capitalism versus communism, here next up we have Karl Marx here. So I've also mentioned to him also here in later in my philosophy the part in my history of greatest philosophers video already here, and as well as Friedrich Hayek here. I think here, who I think I might get to neck Hayek, I think, and but let's go over Karl Marx here, and then summarize it, and then afterwards here or something. All right. So Karl Marx, who was born in like back in Prussia in 1818, and then he died in 1883. Basically, his philosophy that was known as Marxism analyzes society through the lens of class conflict as economic system and also historical change, advocating for the communist society. His key ideas of the historical materialism and the economic base shapes of the social and political structure of the concept of alienation here, where capitalism alienates workers from their own themselves here. If you guys also didn't know, also here, I did talk about this part also about alienation between him in the around like the 1840s with both Karl Marx and the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, where they thought that they would basically fix alienation together through a philosophical discussion, but but that's not how like basically it just works out here. So basically, like Marx has basically argues that like alienation comes from like basically for capitalist workers from like basically that they get alienated from like the amount of like basically work and like basically they get here, and also as the capitalist system that they're like alienated by. Whereas like for Soren Kierkegaard here, he basically says that from alienation but the prize for more through like more experience here, as well as like later into a lot more through stress and through into a lot of anxiety here, and to value the less value meaningless here is the point here. But he argued that back to Karl Marx here, he argued that capitalism creates inherent conflict between the bourgeois and the proletarian, so like the owners and the workers here, which will inevitably lead to the socialist revolution and then establish a classless a communist society with a common ownership, that means of production. And let's go, and with that, let's go over to the class struggle. Marx argued that history is a theory of classist struggles in capitalism. This conflict is between the bourgeois, and this means of production, and the proletarian who makes to sell their labor for the wages here. So basically, Marx had argued like basically for like capitalist workers here who basically who are growing a lot more wealthier, a lot richer here, and like have a lot of money and wealth in them here, and whereas like the workers here who are basically poor money and like basically that they didn't buy anything here, that they were left a little bit behind here, and that the wealthiest class is on the top here, again like on the top below to where the working class really is here, and as well as also that and that was why Karl Marx basically said that that's what basically alienates a lot of workers here, and that the amount of working hours, and like because of like the amount of working hours and the unsafe like working conditions here. And so and then and that basically, and he also argues that and that under alienation here, that they're alienated with their labor and they do not own their products that they create, and that they reduce this single function, that this leads to the creativity of a sense of powerlessness, alienating them from their own creative nature from others here. And yeah, from like alienated from their working factories or from any others here because of that here, and that's why he argued that capitalism needs to be basically reformed here, and that people need to go to work here, to work into the factories here, and that they need to work hard where you basically buy a lot of amount of goods here, and also like with that, with many of the imported goods here, and like basically he believes also that these countries are like communism, with that the businesses need to be also being controlled by the government here, and with to control them and with their imported goods here, and that's where the money gets, and then later into the businesses and the factories were then later basically owned by the government here, and and as well as also then later here that he Marx also then predicted that the internal contractions of capitalism would lead to its collapse of a proletarian revolution that would overthrow the ruling class and lead to a new system where means of production would own the collective of the community, and creating classes, stateless, and communist society. So yeah, basically like to like basically have a less work hour condition, and like basically non-profit here, and the lower amount of working hours of steel and production, as well as agricultural sectors here, and like if the factory gets like basically it's unfair, and then they have the right to like basically rise up here, and then like social revolution, and they still overthrow that government to protest into the amounts of working hours here, and yeah, that's part of like the that and with this here, this is also mentioned also later in both of his books here that he later wrote with the co-author with Friedrich Engels, such as the Communist Manifesto in 1848 here. This work outlines the theory of class struggle and the class for the worker revolution here, such as like the low profit and the less class those section, as well as like and the minimum miles of working hours, and the low price of the grain of the stock production and the steel production. And then later in Das Kapital here that he wrote also in 1867, it is a multi-volume work of the political economy, provides detailed critique of capitalism and its inner workings, that like those that I've mentioned here, and also that he argued that capitalism needs to be reformed here, and how it's like basically bad for like basically a lot of capitalists here, and that basically needs a production amount of factories and workers that basically need to basically grow and work into together here, and about the economy, and it was owned by controlled and everything controlled by the government here, and as well as road prices of agriculture and the amount of factories that many workers and others have worked to. So I basically also will send there a link here of the Communist Manifesto here, and if you guys want to check that out here, I suggest taking the basically I'll leave a link in the description below, as well as these two videos that I've also got for about Karl Marx here, if you want to basically learn more about this guy here, and the links are basically in the description down below here, and yeah. But yeah, that's basically everything we know about Karl Marx. So let's keep going.
This video.
Alright, so now next up we have Friedrich Engels here, which is basically the co-author, the friend of Karl Marx here. So he born from 1820 till he died in 1895. Friedrich Engels was the co-founder of Marxism and a philosopher, and he's a revolutionary theorist here. And he was known for his coordination with cooperation with Marx here, and Karl Marx, and then the Communist Manifesto, and other with the documenting exploitation of the condition of the working class in England, and provided the crucial financial and intellectual support to Marx, and edited his volumes like Das Kapital, and developed the key concepts of communism like dialectical materialism, influencing socialist movements like worldwide, as well as like work working conditions, as well as way well little profit paid there, and as well as also, the amount of factories and working condition and working products, and maybe the goes good here, but they also are being controlled by those in the government that I mentioned. And his philosophy, and going through Engels' philosophy centered to Marxism here, that is defined by the dialect of materialism, viewing the history of nature as an endless processes of the change driven by material conditions, critiquing capitalism, advocating for proletarian revolution to achieve communism here, and emphasizing on class struggle, abolition of private property, that we also need to know here, and the agency of the working class here. So like the bound of private property here, and the growing amount of businesses, working factories, the control by the government, and the growth to cost and more imported goods here, grain productions, and that rely on the economies, the amount of people who are workers who hard work here. That are all developed. All of these ideas were then later developed into Friedrich Engels, and later the idea of communism that I've explained would later influence also into many other socialist revolutions here, such as like the October Revolution in 1917 in Russia, or like the Cuban Revolution in Cuba, or like the in the Chinese Civil War here, or after the Civil War in China, in communist China by Mao Zedong here, or like in the cultural revolution here, or the Great Leap Forward here. But this will also later influence with the idea of also with other philosophers that I mentioned in my part 3 video of the history's greatest philosopher videos. I think that'll later influence also like Michel Foucault and the other philosophers, French philosopher who will also as well as Jean-Paul Sartre, who would later also adopt like basically the idea of Marxism here as a combination with his philosophy of existentialism. All right, let's keep moving. All right. Let's carry on here. Next up, we have John Maynard Keynes here. So, if you guys don't know who he is here, he's a British economics. He was an economist. He was he was the guy who developed known as Keynesian economics here. Who he basically argued that government intervention, primarily through spending, like fiscal policy, and lower the interest rates is crucial to stabilize economics, boost aggregated demand, reduce unemployment, and mitigate the recessions, and counteracting the classical view of markets and self-correct, and focuses on managing a business cycle, like simulating the demand during the downturns, cooling during booms to prevent instability, and the government spending taxes and money supply. And also not to mention, also back to like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, like the idea of communism to also like have stability, and as well as also like the employment here. Yeah, but basically, for going back to Keynes here, so basically, in other words here, he's basically saying that, that government intervention, he thinks that it works through spending and, also to cut taxes and to stabilize economies, fight recessions, but also basically reduce unemployment, stabilize economy, boost aggregated demand, and also to like have markets self-corrected to gain more markets here, and as well as also to prevent any more spending and more taxes and more demanding money supplies here, and we have a video also about John Maynard Keynes here if you guys also want to check out here, and yeah, but let's continue forward here. All right, so next up we have Friedrich Hayek here. So he born in 1899 here, and died in 1992 here. So basically, Friedrich Hayek here, he was part of like he was another like Austrian like philosopher, and he's also an economist too here. But he basically stated, but he worked at the Austrian School of Economics, and he did believe also in like market capitalism, capitalism here, like a free market system, kind of similar to those of like Adam Smith, who I've covered like earlier here. But he says he believed in free markets, in creativity, in innovation, and entrepreneurship, which are basically that are necessary for societies to blow into citizens to prosper. And so, and going through here, the free market capitalism is an economic system where private individuals slash businesses own production driven by competition and supply slash demand with the minimal government interference, also known as the laissez-faire here. If you guys don't know what the laissez-faire is basically means here, it basically means like countries with like governments with like government intervention here have interfering in businesses through like basically countries' economies, or like through supply and demand or entrepreneurship, or like basically control their like jobs or businesses, or the amount of factory, or like or like basically these jobs to of these like how many money or the supplies or the imported goods that these people have basically had made here is basically what they mean. And to set the surprises and the production and distribution and fostering, but the risking inequality and market failures here. It prioritizes individual economic freedom, property rights, and voluntary exchange, relying on the market forces, not state controlled, and to allocate resources. So yeah, basically kind of like what I've explained, like kind of like with Adam Smith here, like to have like jobs, businesses, and allowing free markets to like make freely like make their own products and make their own goods and to make a lot of money, and to like and buy and own and purchase like many of the products and goods here, and to allow the jobs here and production prices and distribution here, and own with by production and creativity and innovation here without government interference here. And then Hayek's concept of spontaneous overemphasizes the concept of social systems, including economies that originate through the interactions of individuals without intentional design here. So yeah, it's like, it's basically kind of like people, like basically who have interactions of the, that got them like viewed or inspired or knowing about like the value or the goodness or the, purchase of these like many product goods or products that many workers or creators have made here. All right. And yeah, that's basically about it here. That was me going through all the history's like greatest economists and also philosophers again here, since you kind of counts here. Um yeah, no, here, and yeah, and one also final fact that I also want to mention also in like the beginning here with like Thomas Malthus and with David Ricardo here over here, is that with Thomas Malthus with his like the with the idea of also with the growing population that would lead to war, destruction, and like within, and he worked together also with that kind of situation, also later with also work on concept the ideas also later to David Ricardo here, who has been in his body here, and he basically also argued and disagreed also this here, and since they also been arguing about also each other also that many amount of people with the would grow like to basically keep it as a balance here in order for basically people with less like to like do from the population to in order for people to actually work and pay jobs and to be also better together like as a society here. And yeah, that's basically about it here. Yeah, that's basically all about it to know about the history of economics. If you guys want to basically, if you guys have any like, if you have any idea, let me know in the comments section down below here if I missed anything. And or if I missed someone or any economists here about the history of economics or any like facts or anything. Please let me know here. And yeah, no, and please let me know if you want me to do also like like, leave your comments down below if you guys want me to do more videos that's related to history of economics or just economics itself here, like the moaning amount of prices, inflation, employment, or like rolling stocks or agricultural prices or prices from working factories or imported goods here, or like tariffs to like imported goods, or like, you know, relying on different called like distribution of the imported goods from like different like for different countries here. And yeah, maybe I'll make a video for that, or like inflation or hyperinflation or and all that stuff, or like free markets or free market capitalism or capitalism and communism or socialism, all that stuff here. If you guys want me to do videos here, please let me know. Your comments down below. So, but yeah, that's basically about it here. Yeah, if you guys haven't yet, if you guys still enjoyed it and you found this video very interesting to watch here, and if you want to watch more of this, history content like this, then what are you waiting for? Don't forget to like, hit share, hit subscribe, and turn on the bell notifications. And don't forget to also subscribe to my main channel, the Mr. Aaron, which is my gaming channel. Links will also be in the description down below. Be sure to subscribe and turn the bell from there too. And yeah, no, and then yeah, and also don't forget to comment. And yeah, no, and that's basically pretty much about it here. So yeah. Anyways, I guess I'll see you guys in my next video. So, Mr. Aaron's out. Peace.